NIST commissioned Underwriters Laboratories to do an actual experiment test with fire on floor assemblies. These are model floor assemblies now, built just like the World Trade Center floor assemblies. This is the right thing to do. Do an experiment. Underwriters Laboratories built the floor assemblies, put fire in there, more intense actually than what you'd expect in the towers. They beefed up those fires. NIST, to their credit, says, yeah, that's right. The steel does not melt in these towers, but maybe warps enough. So we're looking at the warping here, see. And of course, in these experiments, where they had these extra hot fires for a long time, the steel did not melt, you see, at all. But what you do have is warping. So you've got these long floor assemblies, and the warping in the middle was about 3 inches, not that much, okay, 3 inches warping. But they didn't fail, see. They warped, yeah, 3 inches, but no failure. Kevin Ryan, he was working at Underwriters Laboratories at the time.
That's probably the biggest problem, is the idea that external columns would bow inward, which is primary to the official story. There is absolutely no physical testing to support that. There is no intuitive reasoning behind it.
Furthermore, in their NIST report, as you read carefully, they only take you to the point where the towers are poised, each tower is poised to collapse. That's their term, poised to collapse. They don't look at what happens after it starts moving. So now then, what does NIST do? They go to a computer simulation, which is not as good as an experiment, you got to admit, right? Because this is now a computer model trying to get an explanation for the buildings to fail. You know, when they got to the warping, instead of 3 inches, which is what the experiment showed, 42 inches. That's over 3 feet of warping. Now, that's a big difference. So you do the experiment, you get 3 inches, like that, and you do your computer model, and you stick in there 42 inches. I mean, what? You see what I'm saying?
And the only support is from a highly manipulated computer model in which, you know, the temperatures were exaggerated, the fire times were exaggerated, all the fireproofing was stripped off, and the floors were disconnected, so that we've got absolutely no actual conceptual framework in which to see columns being pulled inwards. But if the floors are disconnected, there's no force to pull the columns inward. How did it happen? We're talking about a phantom force now in a highly manipulated computer model. And that's what we're basing our future on, and all of these changes we're seeing. So they had test results that disproved what they were saying that happened. There were also comments being made still about jet fuel fires with melting steel by experts supporting the official story. So I wrote to NIST, and I asked them about their report, and I asked them to please clarify the ideas that are being stated in the media and in their report. And I was fired for writing the letter. I was fired for nothing else but writing this letter. I didn't violate any policies. I had been promoted just earlier that year to the top management position in my division. They gave me a letter of termination. They said that the relationship with NIST was harmed, that it was poor judgment. I was in the front page of my local newspaper, who also interviewed UL. And they asked UL, well, what this guy saying true? Did you test or certify the steel? And they said, well, there's no evidence that we tested the steel. They didn't say they didn't do it, or their CEO was wrong. They said there was no evidence for it. Okay, that's a problem.
Not even the experts agree with each other. So what else could have caused the Twin Towers and Building 7 to collapse?
10 o'clock on itself.
The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed.
We have no idea what caused this.
Almost looks like one of those planned implosions.
As if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself and it is not there anymore.
If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
We heard another explosion, and I'm assuming that's the one that came from the lower level. since there were two, and I said,
Right, because it was like 18 minutes apart.
Well, this is, no, the first explosion, and there was a second explosion in the same building. There were two explosions.
Okay.
Federal agencies that were down there do believe that there was some sort of explosive device somewhere else besides the planes hitting.
NBC's Pat Dawson is close to the scene of that attack. Pat?
Just moments ago, I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department, Chief Albert Turry. We received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place, and then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took place, he said, there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. He thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. The second device, he speculates, was probably planted in the building.
There were 2 or 3 similar huge explosions, and the building literally shook. You literally shook at the base of this building.
First one and then the other. Some say after secondary explosions.
When a big explosion happened, all of a sudden the elevator blew up, smoke. I dragged the guy out, his skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out, and I helped him out to the ambulance.
Walking down the stairs, we made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor.
Just get out of the tunnel and it blew.
The subway tunnel?
Yeah.
Tell us what's happening out there.
Oh my
We just witnessed some kind of secondary follow-up explosion on the World Trade Center #2, the one.
Secondary.
We understand now there has been a secondary explosion on Tower 2.
There was another major explosion. The building itself, literally the top of it came down, sending smoke and debris everywhere.
Collapse.
5 blocks from the World Trade Center, and we were standing here when there was some sort of collapse or explosion. Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse? To me, it sounded like an explosion.
When I try to save people, in the moment we heard a big explosion coming down. Everything just went black. Everything came down, glass started popping, people got hurt, stuff went on top of them, and it was a big explosion, and everything got dark, real dark, like snow.
The FBI is here, as you can see. They had roped this area off. They were taking photographs and securing this area just prior to that huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
Coming over our radio, get out of the area, the second tower is coming down.
They tell you the second tower is coming down?
Yes, it's about to collapse.
At 10:30, I tried to leave the building, but as soon as I got outside, I heard a second explosion and another rumble and more smoke and more dust. I ran inside the buildings, the chandelier shook, and again, black smoke filled the air. Within another 5 minutes, we were covered again with more silt and more dust. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last.
We just saw that as well. The second tower, the only one that was standing, tower #1, we saw some kind of explosion, a lot of smoke come out at the top of the tower, and then it collapsed down onto the streets below.
David Lee, what can you tell us?
John, just seconds ago there was a huge explosion, and it appears right now the second World Trade Tower has just collapsed.
The way I describe what happened to the towers is that they were, I don't think you can get around calling these explosions. They exploded into these clouds of dust with steel hurling in all directions. And these explosions became over 500 feet in diameter by the time they reached the ground. Actually more like 800 feet in diameter. And, but the reason I think people don't think of them as explosions is because they occurred over a period of 15 seconds in either case. So there wasn't a particularly, like normally people think of an explosion as you hear a loud crack, a bang, and then it's just that one event. But if you have, in the case of a demolition where you might have thousands of explosions that are all blending in, then you get one huge explosive event, but you don't hear any distinct explosions that's so much above the roar of it. The thing sounded like, sort of like an ocean wave, just this incredibly loud roar.
Sounded like the 4th of July. You heard a big explosion before the building fell?
I saw it as it was happening, and it sounded as if you had 100 of those little black cat firecrackers and you lit them all off at once. That's what it sounded like. It sounded like the finale of the 4th of July over the East River.
And when you're running like that, just in fear for your life, you have no idea how close that is behind you.
How the noise and the way it came across the city.
It seemed to have rumbled almost as if there was another large aircraft flying overhead, but really I think it was the collapse of the building, the volume of the explosion just coming across, just sound waves coming across the city.
The sound waves making their way up from lower Manhattan into the Flatiron District and up into Midtown, coming like a jet flying right overhead, I think is how you described it.
Yeah, just the rumblings of a jet sound almost, but it sounded more like a deep rumbling, probably from the explosion of the collapse.